everybody, this is Flying Arrow Blog, and welcome back to the channel. So now we will begin to get into our topic of the list, or whatever I say in this channel. What if I told you that there was an ocean liner that was built basically 100 years ago and is one of the most famous shipwrecks of all time? Did you guess it right? It was called the Titanic. Now, the history of Titanic was pretty nice, and the way to explain this, I will have to make a long video. So, please come with me for the journey on aboard one of the Olympic-class liners at the time of 1912. So, when we get in, the Titanic had 9 full decks, and it had 4 smokestacks, which is one of the best ways to identify it. And if you know what Titanic is, you probably know that it was built by Thomas Andrews. And yes, that is a true statement. He was the architect who designed Titanic. So in 1909, that was when Titanic's construction began. So that went on for a few years, but in 1911, I think that was probably when they launched the bottom half of the ship. They still had to do the top part of it. So, when the Titanic left the dock, it was floating, very nice, but they weren't done with the construction yet. They got the top on, well, whatever you had to call that, the superstructure, and they probably sailed it to another country, which I'm not really so sure about yet. But that, I remember it doing something like that. It went back and got a couple thousand passengers. When it left Southampton, I think. Wait, I think it went to Southampton, but whatever. It left England, somewhere in England, and it went somewhere. I just now said it. So the Titanic was setting off to the Atlantic Ocean at around 21 knots on April 14th, 1912. So now the Titanic was now heading at full speed just to get a good review of the fastest ocean liner in the world. But the captain, of course, wanted to get its record, but they got warnings from other ships. But they got 5 warnings from the ships. They were all telling Titanic to be careful of other icebergs. So the Titanic ignored it because they wanted to get the captain wanted the Titanic to get a good interview as the fastest liner in the world so far. So, as they did, it was a water night. Well, I'm not really sure what I said there, but it was a glossy, smooth night. But it was very, very cold. But the water was very smooth. There was barely no wind and hardly any waves. Still, the Titanic was heading at full speed, and probably the glass smoothie water helped the Titanic glide through the water as quickly as possible. But, unfortunately, they could not see this iceberg right here too quick enough. But we can back up a minute. Before the Titanic even left the harbor, there was a man named David Blair who would have been on the Titanic's lookout, but he had the keys to the locker of the binoculars. If it wasn't for that little key, the Titanic could have been saved. So now we're at the Titanic turned to left of the starboard, which it turned left of the iceberg, and as we all know, it scraped a giant gash along its starboard side. And we all know, after that the Titanic could still float with 4 of these compartments flooded. But it would have been better. Not very many people know this. But if the Titanic would have just went head-on the iceberg, if you know what I mean, it will very make sense, because it would just puncture like this compartment right here. But if you do this, you're just gashing lots of holes. Like if you just kept on going, all compartments would have been flooded and the Titanic would have just went down like this. But still, people don't know that it would have been better if it was hitting head on. But we all know what happened, and so the Titanic ruptured 5 scratches along its side. Not 5 scratches, but just 5 watertight compartments had been flooded. And this is an inflatable Titanic, so I don't know if I can represent the sinking in this video, so I'm sorry if y'all don't get to see that. So I'm just going to talk about it. When the Titanic was beginning to go down at probably 11:40 p.m., when that was that iceberg right there was spotted. But the crew only really had 37 seconds to steer. Well, that's what the Titanic museums say. And I've been to over 3 museums right now in my life, since I'm only 9 years old. So now we have the Titanic, and it has 5 watertight compartments flooded. It is too much for it to handle, and now it is sinking. Front first, people thinking that the unsinkable ship would never go down. But here was the thing. People did not believe that the Titanic was sinking, so they just didn't want to board the lifeboats. But the crew members were clear on what happened. The passengers just couldn't believe it, so they didn't want to get on the lifeboats. Though people who did, the lifeboats only went down half full. And if it would have been for more lives saved, there could have been more than 20 lifeboats. The Titanic was supposed to carry 60, but then they reduced it to 40 and finally 20 just because the passengers would get a good view of the deck. So this is what would happen. The people don't want to board the lifeboats. The ship is going down in 2 hours and 40 minutes, and it is over 1 time smaller or 2 times smaller than ordinary cruise ships today. What could go wrong, thought the passengers. Big, big mistake. So once it picked up an angle with about 1 stack in the water, they were clear that the Titanic was totally going down. Oops, I flipped that over. So they totally would have changed their mind if they would have understood. But everybody did what they wanted to do. So just like that, the people who didn't trust the crew members, those were probably most of the victims. So now, as we all see, the Titanic broke in 2 in the 1997 film and went down like this, and it went down completely. But hold up, we still got more history. In 1985, Robert Ballard discovered the Titanic on looking for a U.S. Torpedoes that would have landed there, or submarines. He accidentally discovered Titanic. It was still in an okay condition. It was not the best, really. We all knew that the Titanic broke into 2 pieces. And so, just like that, today, the Titanic is a history that touches people's hearts all around the world. And this video will represent that. Thank you for watching.